Hello and welcome back. Today I'm going to be watching and reacting to and trying to understand From Cold War Colossus to Cash-Strapped Shadow. Now, for months now, with the videos that I've been watching and reacting to about the British military, I was going above and beyond of praising the military. Perhaps I've jumped too far, too quick, I don't know. Let me know what you think and we'll get in a discussion there. So let's jump into this and see if I was very wrong.
Many of you have probably noticed that some politicians seem pretty keen to involve NATO in some sort of shooting war with Russia over Ukraine. Obviously, no one is proposing a nuclear war, but rather a conventional conflict. But apart from the United States, are NATO countries even remotely able to conduct such a war with the forces at their disposal? After the US, Britain has always been the number 2 NATO power in terms of military strength and capability. But are the British armed forces configured for large-scale conflict with Russia? As a historian, I can say no, because the last time Britain fielded military forces specifically designed to counter Russian aggression in Europe was in 1991, at the tail end of the Cold War, the year the Soviet Union collapsed. An awful lot has changed for the British Armed Forces in over 30 years, as successive governments have cut defence spending and the size of the armed forces, confident that no large-scale conventional war in Europe would ever be fought again. So let's compare the different sizes, the different parts of the British Armed Forces today, with the military that was specifically designed to counter Soviet aggression 3 decades ago.
That seems like a common theme throughout countries in general, but especially Europe, where decade after decade goes by without any major war going on, maybe conflicts here and there, but no major all-out war like is going on in Ukraine currently. So they start feeling safe, they start pulling money away and start putting it in other places. It's just not top priority because they haven't needed it for decades. So I feel like it's just a common theme just by human nature of something just to change or do.
By any measure, the figures are shocking and should probably convince most reasonable people that engaging in a massive conventional war with a country as large as Russia is not desirable and perhaps even possible. And this is not just me saying it, but also plenty of retired admirals, generals and air marshals, and a few serving ones too, not to mention the United States itself, which commented very recently that Britain's armed forces are simply too small to do the job anymore. None of this is a reflection of the brilliant men and women who serve in the British Armed Forces. This video is not a criticism of any of them. It is rather of the policies that have led to this current state of affairs. So let's begin with the all-important subject of cash, the use of taxpayers' money to fund the military.
Yes.
Now, it reveals that successive governments since the end of the Cold War have preferred to cut expenditure on defence matters and put the money into other things. This may be correct or it may not be. However, in 1991 the defence budget was 4.11%. In 2021 this had shrunk to just 2.5%.
I think this average is roughly what countries do in general. They go for like 2.5% or so. At least when I've looked at military spending on global firepower, I think the website's called. I think Europe especially, and probably other countries, but I mainly looked at Europe, is around that 2.5%.
The Royal Navy has always been the backbone of Britain's defences, and indeed,
Yes.
Britain has always maintained a large navy and a small regular army.
Wow.
However, the situation today is we have a small regular army and an equally small Royal Navy. This can be a problem because we are an island nation. We import most of what we need to survive. The Navy is also supposed to project power all over the world via its ships, submarines and aircraft. The Navy of 1991 was specifically configured to counter Soviet aggression in northern waters. The Navy today has shrunk to a shadow of its former self. In 1991, the Royal Navy had 63,000 full-time personnel. The figure today is about 30,000.
Wow.
Of course, fewer personnel are required because the fleet has shrunk to such a small number of ships in 30 years of defence cuts. In 1991, the Royal Navy fielded a fleet of 29 submarines. Today it has only 10. Now, no matter how capable modern submarines may be, and they are certainly much more capable than those of the 1980s and 90s, no one can seriously consider 10 submarines can do the job of 29 former vessels. With such a tiny fleet, how many of those submarines would be in refit, having maintenance done at any one time? A handful of active submarines, as with any other vessel, aircraft, or vehicle, cannot be everywhere at once. Fewer equals less coverage and less impact on the battle. Aircraft carriers are one area where things seem to be improving. In 1991, the Royal Navy fielded 3 small aircraft carriers, carrying the famous Sea Harrier jet. Today, the Royal Navy has 2 enormous Queen Elizabeth-class aircraft carriers. The bill for each of these vessels over £3 billion.
And it looks so beautiful. I did 2 videos with this in it. They're beautiful, amazing aircraft carriers, and I'm glad I'm at least correct in that area. But let's continue.
But few aircraft actually equip them. Having only 26 F-35B Lightnings, the ships designed to accommodate 24 to 36 such aircraft each. Though enormously capable aircraft and enormously capable ships, how long could they remain in action before combat losses, maintenance issues, pilot losses and fatigue, etc. remove them from the battle? The new carriers need destroyers and frigates to protect them, and also to carry out range of tasks across the fleet, from patrol and escort duties, anti-aircraft and anti-missile warfare and anti-submarine warfare and so on. In 1991, the Royal Navy possessed an astounding 51 destroyers and frigates. Today, that number has shrunk to just 18 vessels, which, even taking into account advances in missile technology, ship design, anti-submarine warfare, etc., is still far below the number the Royal Navy actually wants.
Seems like a lot of these numbers are roughly around cut in half from 1991, but what I would guess from this video is that also 1991 was just their peak because they kind of needed to build up, and they had quite a while to because the Cold War lasted a long time. And then after the Soviet bubble popped, the Iron Curtain disappeared. So did their defense budget spending and the need or the urgency to go on and continue up with that pace. But it definitely looks like a lot of these numbers cut in half, if not a little more, in about 3 decades.
For example, the Type 45 class guided missile destroyer, the Royal Navy's most modern class of destroyer, numbers only 6 vessels. Originally, the Royal Navy was to have had 12, but the government of the day cut 50% of the vessels to save money. These are just a few of the facts and figures regarding the Royal Navy. Turning to the British Army, in 1990 to 91, the army was very large and designed to counter a Soviet attack across the North German plains and into Scandinavia. Manpower stood at 153,000 personnel. Today, the army has shrunk by 30 years of endless amalgamations and cuts to just 86,000 personnel, plus around 30,000 or so in the Army Reserve, the renamed Territorial Army, who are being asked increasingly to do the same job as regular personnel and go on long overseas tours with regular forces. Any large-scale war with Russia will involve tanks, lots and lots of tanks. That's something the war in Ukraine has shown absolutely abundantly.
Here's another one where the numbers, I'm sure, were cut massively, but I also did the video of the Challenger 2. I believe they're working on developing the Challenger 3, and already the Challenger 2 main battle tank, the British Army, is a beast, is an absolute monster. So I forget the number of tanks they actually have. Yeah, I'm sure it's really low. Let's see.
In 1991, the British Army had some 1,200 tanks, including about 800 tanks deployed in Western Germany.
Wow.
Today, the Army has only 223 Challenger 2 tanks in service, and reports show recently in the press that many of these vehicles are unserviceable and not fit for purpose. An army that is so small cannot sustain large-scale operations for very long before casualties, mechanical issues, wear and tear, etc. force it to start taking troops from elsewhere. Replacements would presumably have to come from the Army Reserve, but the number of fit, available, and willing reservists that could be sent into action to support the regulars is probably well below the government's target of 30,000, which in itself is a tiny number. For example, the Territorial Army in 1991 numbered 73,000 personnel, almost the size of the regular army today.
Yeah.
The government would need to call back to the colours the Regular Reserve, a pool of trained former regular soldiers contractually committed to recall in times of emergency.
So, question for if you're British, for the past, 10 years, 20 years, was the decision to cut spending in the military because nothing huge was going on? Did the British typically agree on cutting spending just slowly but surely over a long period of time because they wanted to spend it in other areas? Because I feel like here in the US, and I feel like Britain's along the same lines, love our military here. We love seeing it big and projecting power. It's a big US thing, but I feel like the British are the same way. And if I were to guess, it probably wasn't, don't cut spending or at least keep it the same. But I'd like to know if that was the case. If everyone was feeling comfortable, it's like, yeah, we don't need a huge military anymore. We don't need to be spending this much money on them. Nothing's happening in the world that really needs a huge force like in 1991. Let's keep cutting it. Or were you and friends, family, people that you knew, just the general vibe of things, not liking the decision to chip away at the military spending budget? I'm just curious of what it was throughout this time.
However, the Regular Reserve stands at around 20,000 liable personnel. Again, a tiny pool. Looking at all the other aspects of the British Army, from artillery guns to rocket systems to armoured personnel carriers to all sorts of different types of equipment, we see that they have very good equipment but not very much of it, and too few people for the amount of commitments the British Army is already involved in around the world. The Royal Air Force would of course play a vital role in any conventional war with Russia and her allies, but again the service is but a shadow of its Cold War size and strength. In 1990, the Royal Air Force numbered 90,000 personnel. That is 5,000 more people than the current British Army. Today, the Royal Air Force is down to just over 33,000 personnel. The jet fighter force has dramatically diminished. In 1989, the RAF had an astounding 850 frontline attack jets of all types. This figure is down to only 137 Typhoons, and of that number, 22 are two-seat trainers that don't go to war. So realistically, the RAF's frontline combat strength amounts to just 115 aircraft. It also operates a small number of F-35Bs with the Royal Navy's Fleet Air Arm. Factoring in attrition, mechanical issues, pilot issues, how would the RAF squadrons remain operational in the event of all-out war, and for how long? These are problems that could not be solved in the short term. The equipment is highly expensive and highly complex, and aircrew require years of very careful and expensive training. So, these are just a few comparisons that can be made between the British Armed Forces of the early 1990s, when, as I said, it was designed to counter Soviet aggression in Northern Europe, and the armed forces of today that many politicians would like to see sent into some kind of combat situation against Russia. Especially as any action against the Russians would be very similar to those kind of military operations that were planned against the Soviet Union in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, and early 90s.
I like that ending there. I thought I was watching a film. Mark hit the nail on the head for me, what was going through my head, my thoughts about the British military is cutting edge, top of the line, very sophisticated, very excellent equipment, but it's just cut so much, and I think that is the issue that Mark is really hitting at here. Everything has shrunk 50%, if not a lot more, and if something were to break out, this really complex technology of excellent, top of the line military equipment would take a long time to actually get in production and keep rolling. But I'd like to know your thoughts on this, what you think of it as, especially if you live there in the United Kingdom. I'd like to hear your thoughts of the previous couple decades and where we are today, maybe where you would like to see the British military be in a couple years down the line. All of that is very eye-opening to me and hopefully your fellow countrymen and just people around the world that are also reading the comments, getting in the discussion, because I would like to know from you. So I'll see you down there. Thank you for watching. Thank you for joining. I will do more of these and I will see you very soon. Have a good rest of your day.